Hello, I'm happy to welcome Erich Berger today. He's from the Finnish Bio Art Association. He's a curator and media artist. He works with the field of deep time, and I'm very happy to have him here today. Thank you. Welcome.
Thank you, Rüdiger, for the invitation. And I think I will just get to it and share my screen. And then I will share my thoughts with you. Yeah, so as Rüdiger already mentioned, I have a strong interest in deep time and in question of geology and how they relate basically to the contemporary. And this interest basically has led me to work with processes which run on time scales which are very different from the way we humans experience time, especially in our everyday life. And this led me then to work with, as I said, geology, with radiogenic phenomena, and these socio-political implications in the here and now. And I got specifically interested in this dichotomy between the human time perception and the time in the biological, in the environmental, and in the geological processes which we as humans are part of. And this dichotomy, I think, arises, for example, from the present, as we as individuals are challenged to engage in endeavors and also in measures to secure a human future, which we will not be part of, and for humans, which we will never know. So I think this is an interesting field of tension. And the image, what you see here, is from an expedition which I co-organized last September into a part of Finland, which is furthest up north in Sapmi. And there we find the last remains in Finland of sediments, and they are really old. And here we find traces of the first animals where we have basically footprints of. So they are so-called trace fossils of animals. So we are talking also about human impact here, and the human impact and also the awareness about it are leaving human timescales. And we are entering planetary time, I think. And this becomes evident with so-called scale effects, like the climate breakdown, or also, like Rüdiger mentioned, the nuclear waste. And of course, also other evidence of humans altering the Earth system itself, as it is discussed at length in the Anthropocene discourse. And my question related to this is basically what kind of artistic strategies can assist us to perform this Anthropocene. And I will bring some examples from other artists, but I will also talk about my own artistic practice. And I will want to discuss some thoughts and invite you to explore those scales which go beyond the human comfort zone. And this slide, for example, shows the work Long Player by artist Cem Feiner. And it is a 1,000-year-long musical composition. It began playing at midnight on the 31st of December, 1999, and it will continue to play without repetition until the last moment of 2,999, at which point it will complete its cycle and maybe begin again. And Long Player grew out of a conceptual concern with problems of representing and understanding the fluidity and expansiveness of time. And while it found form as a musical composition, it can also be understood as a living 1,000-year-long process, actually a social sculpture, because it needs people to live. But let's maybe first establish a baseline on how to think about the Anthropocene, or maybe how I think about the Anthropocene, because it is a word which is used quite frequently, and people maybe mean different things about it. So The Anthropocene, as you know, is this proposal for a new geological epoch from geologists because of the realization that the planetary impact of human activity is able to change the Earth system itself. And it is not yet clear if the term is scientifically, geologically useful, and also when in time and where in the geological strata the Anthropocene should be anchored to fulfill the scientific requirements for announcing a new geological unit. And responsible for that is the working group on the Anthropocene. But however, the term finds strong resonance among artists and in the humanities, and quickly turned into a revel of contemporary discourse. On the one hand, it is an evocative concept and it is welcomed for summarizing a moment of global crisis, but on the other hand, also under strong critique and scrutiny for its unsatisfying generalization and also for its anthropocentrism, and especially also the production of blind spots, like the obliteration of the responsibility of a few over the many, as if each and every human has the same impact on the symptom production of the Anthropocene. But that is, of course, nonsense. Yeah? Like, for example, we in Europe are very much adding to the Anthropocene, if you wish, to a very different degree than other people on the planet. And this concern of this kind of blind spots is also very well demonstrated in a text, for example, by Katrin Yusuf, which is called The Billion Black Anthropocenes, or None, in which she examines how the grammar of geology actually is foundational to establishing the extractive economies of subjective life and the earth under colonialization and also especially under slavery. And what you see here is a still from Lauren Kronemeyer's work, Becoming an Epoch Warrior. She fights the Anthropocene. And while Lauren is a prepper and rehearsing the post-apocalypse, basically the work itself is about fighting against the Anthropocene for the above reasons, or at least try to questioning it. And these shortcomings of the Anthropocenes have led also to an interesting deconstruction of the term itself in the form of so-called anthropomemes. And anthropomemes are various synonyms which are emerging to emphasize these different aspects and readings of the Anthropocene. And they, I think, show that the term is, yes, evocative, but as I said, unsatisfying and generalizing. And since January 2015, I have become an avid collector of those serious but also playful rewordings, and some are from renowned scholars and are used in academic Anthropocene discourse. Others have been made up on the spot to pinpoint or highlight a certain personal interpretation or aspect. So I'm sharing them once a year on the BioArt Society Facebook page and ask people to contribute. And so there are for sure some which you have heard of, like the Anthropocene by Jussi Parikka or the Cthulhucene from Donna Haraway, but then others are like just from people who hang out on social media and want to kind of pinpoint their version of the Anthropocene. At the moment, I count 88, and I would be happy if you could contribute to this list. Two other concepts which I frequently use are deep time and deep future. And deep time essentially means the geological time, the Earth history from its beginning until the present, whereas deep futures do not exist yet. They are a thought vehicle to speculate within the possibility space of a future Earth, which is still unfolding during the long time our planet has still ahead. Depicted on this slide is a work by Katie Patterson, Campo de Cielo meteorite, which has traveled through space and time for over 4.5 billion years. And it was then, after it fell and found, it was cast, melted, and then recast back into a new version of itself, replicating its original form. And then a meteorite was later returned to space by the European Space Agency. My own current artistic research takes place under the umbrella of spectral landscapes and is investigating radioactivity and the landscape. And during the last couple of years, I conducted intense fieldwork in Finland and also on other sites, exploring sites with heightened natural radioactivity. And some of those sites are also potential future mining sites. And this radioactivity is originating from the radioactive decay of natural uranium and thorium in the rock. And here I collect data which allow me to portray the gamma radiation fields which protrude from the radioactive base rock as intricate but intrinsic features of the landscape. And here we see such a place. It's called Kovila. I was working a lot there, and there is also an image of the mineral which contains the uranium and thorium. And it is a potential future mining site. And what I get from this data, which I collect, are these kind of three-dimensional fields which extend up to 100 meters from the floor into the sky, and they are invisible but present, and their constitution is part of the processes of our planet in deep time, and they tell the story of continental drift, of the biogenic accumulation of oxygen in our atmosphere. They are following the folding of the mountain ranges, and also their weathering, and they follow the carvings of geophysical forms which produce the features of the landscapes which we observe around us. And here what we see on the image is basically a representation of this Kovila site, and the middle image, the one which is basically this, the image which you can see nicely in the middle, is 400 meters wide and 200 meters high, and the yellow lines basically represent the intensity of the radioactivity there. And it's really fascinating to think that there are these towers standing in the landscape of which we have no conception. And I refer to these bodies as spectral because their presence is ghostly and can only be detected via extrasensorial means. But then they are also spectral because they are fields of light. They are photons, although located in a part of the electromagnetic spectrum not visible to the human eye. So here, deep time, deep futures, innate and human-made landscapes, the nuclear contemporary, all these serves as input to spectral landscapes. And here we see the image from before in an exhibition. And last autumn, I was also able to stay for 1 month at CERN in Switzerland, where I was able to further develop this work. And you can see on the image some measurements I took in the Swiss mountains. But my interest in the nuclear contemporary actually stems from the fact that Finland is the first nuclear nation which decided to build a permanent nuclear waste storage facility. It is said to be engineered to keep the waste encapsulated for the next 100,000 years. And Finland also made the decision that the information about Onkolo, this is the name of the place, needs to be maintained over time, but did not specify how to do this. And now think 100,000 years, and now think also that during this time, if climate breakdown doesn't fuck it up, 2 ice ages will also cover Finland. The next ice age actually in about 30,000 years. If you want to know more about this place, Onkolo, then I recommend you to watch the film Into Eternity by Danish director Michael Madsen. So anyway, it is totally unclear, basically, what will happen during this 100,000 years on the surface. I said already, the ice ages will come and go. They will erase all memories from the surface. And looking back into human history and also the current state of affairs, it is also difficult to imagine that a continuous civilization will be aware of what kind of load was sent into the deep future and how to maintain actually the wish of the government to have this information be transmitted from generation to generation. Like, what kind of mechanism would you use for that? On the slide, you can see the word Crystal Palace, Palace, the great exhibition of the works of industry of all nuclear nations. And they are lit up by a combination of uranium glass and UV light by artists Ken and Julia Ionetani. And it is a hauntingly beautiful work, which for me perfectly captures also this kind of eerie nuclear desire, which keeps on constantly popping up. But as I said in the beginning, the nuclear contemporary is only one example of scale effects we are facing and which artists are engaging in. In general, I think we can see an increasing amount of artists who are working with complex ecological issues, the climate breakdown, and which is another story of contamination, or also social and racial injustice as a result of past and present practices of colonialism linked with politics of extraction. And coming with it, I think, is also a growing interest in matters of knowledge and the examination of the real. And I think what is important here is that it is not about the arts to defend a postulated truth or to defend science, but actually to explore the depths of reality. And by depth, I mean also to go beyond that which we can experience or comprehend within our own bodies and sensorial capabilities, or the way we see things. Like, for example, on the slide, we see sketches for an Earth computer by Martin Haus. And Martin Haus asks, where does the execution of software takes place? And the question normally we answer, well, it's in the computer, but basically he explores basically the material consequences of computing, and that execution, and in that sense, basically negative impact on life, is happening also on those places where we actually source the materials we use to drive our techno society. And Benjamin Bratton calls this depth of reality the scope of the real. And the scope of the real is something which extends beyond the human sensorial and neural comfort zone. It has scales which are inhuman, and those scales also enter the realm of the non-human in space and in time. And they are addressing phenomena which might be too small, too vast, too quick, too slow. And while we might still be able to put such phenomena into numbers or do calculations on them, it is really difficult to find forms of representation. Also, shifting scales not only change quantities, but also lead to shifting qualities. Something not moving within a human time frame might still move within geological time. And a complete spectrum of scales is presented by the artwork from Arthur Gensen, which is called Machining Concrete, which is on the slide. And it's a gear work, as you can see, and each gear pair of the machine reduces the speed of the motor by 1/50th. And the first motor turns 200 revolutions per minute, and it will take well over 2 trillion years before the final gear makes but one turn. And given the truth of this situation, it is not possible to do anything at all with the final gear, and you can, as the artist, even embed it in concrete. Geologist Marcia Björnerud introduces a concept which she calls timefulness. And with that, she points out that we should adopt a polytemporal worldview to help us to develop a planetary thinking. Because to understand and act in the world on human scale might appear as common sense at first, but according to her, we need to develop an awareness that the scales we use are not given by the world, but have been with us out of tradition, or they have a history. And the last two slides show details of inheritance, which is a work I did together with Finnish jewelry artist Mari Ketu. It consists of precious jewelry, a necklace, earrings, and the bros, which are radioactive and therefore rendered practically unbearable for deep futures. So to continue from before, from Björnerud, the basic principles actually of our ethics, of our aesthetics, and our epistemology were formulated at a time where the human sensorium was believed to be made to the measure of the world. But if these principles are not a priori given by the world, but basically man-made, then they are in the domain of the political. And so we can actually speak of a politics of scales, which is a term which was actually coined by Neil Smith, a geographer, to attend to the processes through which scales are constructed and contested. And Smith notes that, and now I quote, "Geographical scale is political precisely because it is the technology according to which events and people are quite literally contained in space. Alternatively, scale demarcates the space or spaces people take up or make for themselves. In scale, therefore, are distilled the oppressive and the emancipatory possibilities of space, its deadness, but also its life." And while Smith is examining geographical space, we can see with what I talked with Breton and also with Björnerud that a more general evaluation of scales is of interest. And this is an undertaking which I think we can very well locate in contemporary artistic practices, and specifically in what we can call the geologic turn. And on the slide, we see work by Doris Salcedo. She installed this crack in the earth of the Tate's Turban Hall to address a long legacy of racism and colonialism that underlies the modern world, like it would be a principle of nature. So we might be able to continue from Smith when we expand the politics of scale from geographical space with time. And we could then introduce a geotemporal scale and say that it is political precisely because analog to the geographical scale, it demarcates the space over time which future humans or other entities are able to take up or make space for themselves. It is now that we basically draw these temporalities which future generations have for them or have to deal with. The work Rare Earthenware on this slide points to such ecological insanities in the production of rare earth elements, which are basically basic ingredients for our technology. Another work I want to show is the Uterine Connection by Dutch artist Gerrit van Bakel. And the machine for the Tarim Basin, which you see on the right, the long one with the many lakes, crawls at about the speed of 18 millimeters across the 1,100 kilometer of the Tarim Plain and will, according to Van Bakel's calculations, take about 30 million years to cross it. And I think of the machine becoming part of its environment and its times and people coming and going, being assisted and maintained over deep time, being witness and bearing witness itself. I think that many of the works I showed today and many which I was not able to discuss show elements of what I would like to summarize under the idea of radical witnessing. What these artists and their works have in common is that they stage attempts for a thing, for a machine, a process, or a question to articulate itself through an intrinsic feature of itself, through its own language, if you wish. In a similar spirit, the Iron Ring project by Cecilia Jonsson invites us to a poetic and material-based journey about pollution, which connects 23 kilograms of iron-rich plants, which are collected from a Spanish iron mine, with the result of a process as a 3-gram iron ring forged out of the iron harvested from the plants themselves. So with radical witnessing, those artworks perform the evidence actually through their own materiality and through their temporal properties and the processes they enact and the stories they tell. And they do this to whomever is asking for evidence and is attuned to their scale. And I think that we can find in those strategies, or what we can find in those strategies, is that there is less representation or translation, but more of a direct encounter with the scope of the real, to come back to Benjamin Breton. So, because I think as we as humans engulf ourselves intentionally or unintentionally into those processes which outlive us as individuals, we could as well equip ourselves with the necessary tools and languages to understand them. And here I come to an end. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your presentation. I was watching a podcast, I listened to a podcast, and they dropped an interesting line where it says, the time is an invention of the body. And when you talked, I was thinking about exactly this thing, because in the beginning it made no sense to me whatsoever. But now, the more I think about it, the more sense it makes. So, what is your take on that?
Yeah, I think that, like, I'm not talking now about time, like, I don't know, physicists are kind of exploring it, but I think that, yeah, that there is a strong time subjectivity which it took us a while to realize. Yeah, like I said in my presentation, that for a long time we thought that the world was built to match human subjectivity, or basically the human sensorium. And the more we know about the world, the more we also understand, or should actually understand, that this is not the case, that there are other other animals, or that other life forms, or that there are processes which just run on completely different scales. I think that it's anyway evident. But I think that also the way we experience time, I think everyone knows that, changes also very strongly over, even within a day. There are maybe, things which take an eternity, or others which are over too quickly.
So would you say that time is to a certain extent subjective, or not at all?
Yeah, I think so. But I mean, this times, how we, like, I'm interested in the time in relation to other times. Yeah, so I'm really interested in this time plurality, and see how we fit into that, because I think, and maybe I was not mentioning about that in the talk, but I think that why it is important to get a sense of this time plurality is basically for the design or construction of these futures, or like an awareness of a future, to actually develop a sense of something like intergenerational justice, to develop a sense that after us, and not only our children, but on a much longer time scale, we are impacting on the planet, which inflicts on the livelihood of others, be they now human or non-humans, on a scale which we have no conception of, like, for example, with the nuclear waste or with climate breakdown. So it's not only about kind of cleaning the street for next day or kind of save some money for your children that they have a good life, but it's really about getting a conception how long into the future human impact is actually working.
But isn't it that a lot of impacts are actually, or many inventions or many developments are actually misunderstandings? So many times impacts, let's say the meteorite which ended the dinosaurs, did it not have advantageous situations for us?
No, of course. I mean, that we also call those events acts of God. Yeah. but when we talk about, for example, climate breakdown, nuclear waste, or pollution, then these are not acts of gods. These are kind of acts of stupid animals, which don't care.
Okay, I'm just trying to be polarizing.
I would like to ask if you think there is a difference between scale in time and scale in distance or in space. How we perceive extremely large distances and extremely long times, if this is the same concept or if there is a difference?
It's a good question. Like, for example, in this politics of scale, like I was trying to introduce it, it basically meant basically a space over time. Yeah. But if you're basically traveling, no, like, for example, by space over time, I mean, you are situated. We can, for example, take the city of Salzburg as such a space, yeah, and then basically see, like, what are we doing to Salzburg and how this kind of what kind of spaces this produces over time, yeah. But your question is more like moving, when I'm moving from place A to B, let's say, maybe not on Earth, but maybe I try to go to, I don't know, the next system, which has promising habitat, which is very far away. Then I think then of course the concept of distance and time, they come together, yeah, and they come together basically in the way we move there. Like, what is the capability of our, I don't know, spaceship, so to speak, yeah. So distance here becomes time, yeah. But I don't know if this was your question.
It's one aspect of the scalability, I think, but I also think that maybe in our brains, like, if we can look at something that is very, very big, but we cannot really experience something that is very, very long, because we just die before the end of that time period. But we could still look at the very large space, like
that is true,
into
yeah,
the sky.
But
I think
this is exactly where the problem is,
that we take this very huge scale, space or time, and relate it to something that we know from our experience, like a table or something, or a chair or a house or something like this.
These are two very important aspects, I think. The one is basically the attempt to downscale something with the intention to make it comprehensible. Yeah, and I'm interested in the opposite, basically. Like, why don't we face the complexity? Why don't we face the scale, even if we struggle? This is what interests me. The downscaling we have done, like we are masters in downscaling, to bring it into the human comfort zone, to bring it in the neurological human comfort zone, but also into the bodily human comfort zone. But by that, we use basically the quality also of the scale. And the other thing is that, yes, we can maybe perceive big objects, and then we do that. What you say, we say then, for example, it's 10 million football fields. But with time, we have the same problem when you say that we cannot kind of make this perception of time for so long. And this is exactly why I think it's interesting, and where this dichotomy lies. It's because of that we don't have a comprehension of long times. We lose responsibility, or we think we don't have a responsibility over long times. But we are proven wrong now, because now we start processes which completely outlive ourselves. And we need to develop a sense of responsibility and awareness of exactly those processes. I think that's interesting.
Hello.
Hey.
Thanks for your talk. I have a question. You say we're masters in scalability, and if we look, for example, at climate change, I think the climate breakdown, as you call it, I think what's for you the key aspects of communicating such time scales and their impacts to the general public to make the impact perceivable, which I think is very difficult and also drives such a distance from us to the climate breakdown that we can hardly relate to it?
Yeah, that is really an excellent question. I mean, it relates to what I answered before. I think it is a necessity, and even if it's difficult, and even if we don't have the language yet, we might try to find ways how to do it. But what is shocking, what I find very shocking, is that I actually, like 10 years ago, a little bit more than 10 years ago, we made a kind of conference in a biological station in the northern Finland, and we were talking about climate change back then. I'm using breakdown because change is also something which was already introduced to kind of make it sound less less impactful, or to kind of, it's just changing, it's not breaking down. Yeah. So we were discussing about that 10 years ago, and back then I really had I thought that it will not be my problem, that this is something maybe my children have to deal with, or it's something which where the first kind of real impact in my own kind of vicinity, I will not see that. Yeah. But for example, back then, 10 years ago, there was a reindeer herder with us, like Sami, indigenous reindeer man, who is basically living with his animals from the land there. Good friend. This year, they decided to stop because they cannot herd their reindeers anymore because of climate change. And the reason for that is that the winters in up north in Finland getting very wet, which means it rains right before the ice comes, and then the wet ground freezes, and all the lichen, which are the food for the reindeers during the winter, they get basically encased in ice, and the reindeer cannot get there. Even another problem would be, even if the ice does not come and the snow comes, then the lichen get moldy, and then there is also no food source. That basically means that they start, while they were nomads, they could go wherever and find the food. Now the reindeer, because they know that there is no food, the herd starts to disperse, and they can only be kept together by feeding them. So the last 2 winters, they were feeding the reindeer, and now they cannot, they decided that makes no sense for them anymore. So these are maybe stories which we need to tell, and we need to kind of tell people that it's already happening now. It's not happening in the future, and then maybe we kind of can jump the scale problem here.
So get through human relation. It's a very nice thing. Maybe they should make an archive of impacts of climate change on actual human beings and their practices.
Well, I guess you have some impacts in front of your house, probably. Yeah. I don't know if you think that the artificial snowing, which increased over the years in Austria, or also the retreats of the glaciers. I mean, at the moment, it's just basically, how to say, your leisure kind of habits which are inflicted. But this is just the start. Yeah, this maybe to realize that this is basically, at the moment, is something you cope with through technology, but at some point it will come down to the valley as well.
Okay, then all those climate changes and all those processes we are creating right now. I think when we first started Schmied, like one of the things I didn't understand was, okay, there are things which take a time span of, let's say, 60 years or whatever. And my time span actually is between 5 and 10. And one of the problems we're having is that we do not have a correlation between those processes. Like, I cannot understand how something like this actually impacts me. I can only react to it. Yeah. So the problem with the climate change or the climate crisis, or whatever you want to call it, problem is that either on one hand, in the beginning, we were told we're too early. Then we were told nothing happened anyways. Now we are too late anyways. So basically, all the arguments always come to the same effect, that nothing should be done. So from your point of view, how can we actually create eine Handlungsanweisung, like something to hang on to, something to really, where you even have the feeling if it has relevance? I'm not even talking about relevance, and I just know that a lot of solutions have been sold to us are actually just selling propositions.
I think, I'm not an expert on these kind of things, but I understand your tiredness, and I also see that basically there is a kind of general unwillingness of those who actually should represent us to do something against it. What is really interesting is that there is, because, we hear about geoengineering and putting, I don't know, aerosols into the sky, or tons of iron into the sea. And here we are just fighting fire with fire. We are basically applying the same modernist thought which brought us into this situation without any idea of the consequences this might cause in these systems, in these ecosystems. Yeah, but there is a really interesting group of scientists which were writing about something which is called, I think, maintaining life support on planet Earth, and they were pinpointing kind of several of those problems humanity and the planet are facing, and also proposing a way to work basically against it or to minimize it. And none of those solutions were technical. They were solutions which not only basically would help us to mitigate climate change, but actually would make probably the planet into a better place. And on the first list, like on the top, was basically women's rights, education, yeah, these kind of things. Yeah? And they were also explaining how that would actually feed into this kind of into a system where which would create this kind of positive conditions actually to implement what would be necessary to mitigate those multiple crises, this planetary crisis which we have. So I think that it would be nice if these kind of things, proposals, would get a little bit more forum and traction instead of, I don't know, the greenwashing what we see now everywhere, and the technological proposals or the despair some of us have already with climate anxiety and stopping having children and things like that.
Yeah, but even that, it's just, if you talk about long-term effects, then this is all too short-lived, isn't it? But what do we know about the future?
Yeah, I mean, I think that I don't know if we should continue this conversation on this kind of line. One can be pessimistic about it, but I'm more kind of pessimistic about it in a way that I feel that there is no action taken at all, and there is only reactions, but no common long-term thinking implemented, which would lead us somewhere at the moment.
I see a similarity between like what you are describing with scale and how to see the consequences of our dealing like with the world, and also the difficulty to grasp the complexity. Like if you say on the top of the list, what we should change is women's rights and education, we have to deal with this very complex system of our society that we do not understand. It's the same thing like with the scale of time that we do not understand. And we have, I think, like when we learn something from this talk is that we really should not be afraid and downscale every problem to a very small size where we think we have an easy solution for everything, but to really find a solution of how we can deal with this time scale, with this level of complexity as a society or as humans, and not give up and think, yeah, we are too stupid and we are just bored and we cannot change anything. Or maybe I'm wrong.
No, I think that's exactly, we need to face complexity, and we need to learn that, because was it Ingeborg Bachmann who said, die Wahrheit ist dem Menschen zumutbar? So yes. the same counts for complexity. Yeah? People are not stupid. People are told that they are stupid, or they are kept on a level of maybe less information. But also, one problem is the we. When we talk about us, about whom are we talking? Yeah? Are we talking about the inhabitants of Salzburg, or are we talking about the Austrians? Are we talking about the Europeans, or are we talking about everyone? Yeah? Because we live in very different conditions, and we actually live in a very privileged society, like in Helsinki, in Salzburg. There are many of us who don't have a choice, who basically don't even have the privilege to think about this problem. And so whenever we say we need to actually understand that the planet is not a homogeneous population, that some of us take much more space, take much more energy, take much more part in the scale effect of the Anthropocene than others who have no choice than to basically use what they have, even if it's very polluting, but there is just maybe this one opportunity here to bring yourself and your family through the day. So this is actually also what we need to learn. This is also a complexity.
Thinking about space and the relation to us humans, if we think about metaverse and this whole digital universe we are creating with Sandbox, or the whole meta landscapes where you can buy property, and this whole virtual worlds where we are pretty much distancing ourselves from the physical realness around us. How can you bridge this? What's your feeling? How can we bridge those spaces when the attention goes more toward into these virtual realms?
The attention is already very much in the virtual realms. I don't know, like if I go on the metro in Helsinki, then you basically have a wagon full of people who staring to screens, and that wasn't the way. I don't know. Yeah, before the smartphone. But I'm not kind of anti-technology. I think technology is really interesting, and I think there are some really it's. But I think what we see here is actually, we see not technology. We see actually a company trying to sell us an experience, and that is the problem, I think. It is not a technology which is kind of trying to kind of build upon us. It's basically really trying to create, I think, something to escape to. I mean, it's also kind of insane. I think like, I love space exploration. But what is happening now with the private space exploration and the stories and the fantasies which are kind of related to that, like, takes all the fun away. It's basically just insanely rich men who are fulfilling themselves a dream, paid by a working class which is like completely exploited. Minimal wage, cannot go to pee when they deliver. They need to kind of have a bottle where they pee into. Like, these are the people who pay for space exploration at the moment. I know I'm kind of now making it a little bit dramatic, but I think I'm quite on the point. Dramatic.
No problem. Yeah. Thank you.
But to finish it off, I would say, to a certain extent, what is interesting is, if you think about the time we do not comprehend, which is behind us, and then the time we do not comprehend, which is in front of us, which is basically the space exploration, because we have to grasp with light years and stuff like this, which is, from my point of view, I never even had a grasp on what they even try to talk about when I first saw about flights to wherever. But at the same time, I think, to what extent do we just try to create a relevance for our human species? Or is there actually a relevance from my point of view? Because
do you mean what's the sense of life or what?
no. Do we have a relevance as like we do not comprehend, so we don't comprehend the small things, we do not comprehend the big things, yeah. So all we really can grasp is the 50 years around us.
Yeah, that I think that's totally fine. I think that doesn't make us this exactly. That the question comes also from a point of human exceptionalism. Yeah, a human exceptionalism, which kind of I think is part of this debacle we are in at the moment, which kind of also led us to separate ourselves from our surroundings, and so. I think that we have to also learn to be humble and be quite okay by not being relevant. I mean, to whom would we be relevant? To the universe?
Exactly.
I mean, that is an interesting philosophical question because we are information processing entities. That is maybe could be one exception. I mean, and here I'm not speaking about humans, but I'm speaking about life in general. So maybe the question needs to be kind of extended a little bit, and the question could be: is life exceptional, and why is it? Is it relevant for the universe?
I would like to leave it at this note with a humongous question mark.
That's good.
A cliffhanger for future.
That's good.
So thank you very much, Erich.
Yeah, and thank you for the really nice discussion at the end and the questions.
Thank you very much for your talk. Thank you for giving us insight into deep time and space. And yeah, I'm as confused as I was before.